Thank you all for coming. We are here today because yesterday the Trump administration illegally issued an order to cut off federal funding from a range of programs and services that Rhode Islanders rely on. And all day yesterday, I was in touch with dozens of agencies and nonprofit organizations across Rhode Island who were not able to access their funding. Healthcare organizations, educational organizations, nonprofit groups. And this was not a coincidence, it was not an accident, it was a plan. It was part of the Trump administration's plan. And it is a result of their extreme agenda that is only going to increase costs and create unnecessary pain for working people. So I think the message that I want to give to Rhode Islanders is that I, along with the rest of our congressional delegation, are fighting to make sure that these programs continue to be funded. We are demanding more transparency from the Trump administration as to what their plans actually are. And we want people to understand that what Donald Trump is trying to do is blatantly illegal and also wrong. So, as I said yesterday, I was in touch during the course of the day with state agency directors, with nonprofit leaders, with private companies, some of which were comfortable sharing their stories publicly, others of which wanted to try to work things out with the administration quietly. But I can tell you, and I think a lot of this has already been reported, that yesterday every community health center in the state was unable to draw down federal funding. Head Start providers, like Children's Friend, were unable to draw down federal funds. We heard from nursing homes who are experiencing difficulty drawing down federal funds, and that just scratches the surface. Today, the Trump administration seems to be trying to walk some of this back, I think because the public outrage was so significant. And they're saying, well, we never intended for Medicaid or SNAP or, XYZ to be included in this order. That's a lie. It's not a coincidence that all of these systems went down on the same day that they released this memo. People aren't stupid. We understand what they tried to do yesterday. And we also know that this is not over yet, because while a federal judge has ordered the administration to hold off on implementing this order until Monday, the administration is still going to keep pushing, because this is what Donald Trump and the Project 2025 authors have been planning for years, and they're not just going to roll over and give up. I think in the coming days, you're going to see a multi-pronged strategy by congressional Democrats to push back against what's happening. There'll be a legal component to it, a legislative component to it, and a communications component to it. On the legal front, it just bears repeating again, what the Trump administration is trying to do is blatantly illegal. The Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse. Congress appropriates funds, and when Congress appropriates funds, the president doesn't just get to decide that he doesn't want to deliver it. And this is something that has been litigated many times before. I think everyone, I'm sure, has been Googling impoundment recently, and going back to the 1970s, very clear Supreme Court ruling that the president can't just unilaterally withhold funds that Congress has appropriated and that have been signed into law. And I want to give great credit to Attorney General Noronha for leading nearly 24 attorneys generals in bringing suit as well. There will be a legislative strategy. I think that'll be rolled out in the coming days. While it is true that congressional Republicans have shown no willingness at all to stand up to Donald Trump's extremism, the fact is they are likely going to need Democrats to keep the government funded this spring and to avoid hitting the debt ceiling this spring. And I am sure that if they want our cooperation, our leadership is going to be having conversations with them about putting guardrails around what Trump is trying to do. And then just one last thing, and I'll get to this. Two last things. Taking off my Rhode Island hat for a moment, I also have a leadership role in Congress as ranking member for counterterrorism, intelligence, and law enforcement in the Homeland Security Committee. And I do want to take a moment just to explain how dangerous Donald Trump's funding freeze is to our safety and our security. Not every federal agency yesterday put out a list of exactly which grants were going to be cut off from funding, but the Department of Homeland Security actually did. We were able to get our hands on this memo. I posted it to social media yesterday, and dozens of Homeland Security programs designed to protect Americans from terror attacks, from cyber attacks, from hate crimes, were all on that list to be frozen out of funding. And we estimate that over $30 million that was due to Rhode Island agencies and nonprofits from the Department of Homeland Security would be held back if this order went into effect. And that includes funding to help Rhode Island EMA prepare for natural disasters. It also includes funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program to protect synagogues and mosques and churches and other nonprofits from terror attacks. Incredibly dangerous and irresponsible to be freezing funding for no good reason illegally from programs like that. There were even reports that as part of the freeze on foreign aid funding, that the administration had halted payments to security guards at prisons overseas that were housing thousands of ISIS fighters, and that those security guards were not showing up to work this week. Just like beyond reckless. And the last thing I'll say is this. This is an outrage and a crisis, but we can't let it distract us from the other outrages and crises that the Trump administration has already launched us into. So at the same time that we fight to maintain the funding to these vital programs, we are also going to continue to call out how wrong-headed it is of Donald Trump to pardon the violent January 6th rioters, to issue extreme executive orders on things like birthright citizenship that are also clearly illegal and unconstitutional, the dangerous nominees that are going through Senate confirmation this week, including Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel, who are having their hearings tomorrow, who are both dangerous to national security. So we're going to keep talking about all of it. Part of the Trump strategy is to try to flood the zone and spread us thin, and we are not going to let that happen. So I'll stop there. Steve.
Just 2 points. You said at the outset this is all part of a plan of the Trump administration, and you've been hearing from agencies and whatnot here in the state. So what's the plan, and what are they telling you?
Well, the plan is Project 2025, and I think I saw online yesterday, and you guys can verify this, the OMB memo that announced that they were cutting off funding to all these programs, they didn't know how to scrub the metadata from the document, and so you went into the metadata of the document, and you could actually see the names of Project 2025 authors who had helped draft that memo. So this is something they've been planning for a long time, but it's number one, illegal, number two, inadvisable, and number three, just stupid politics. This is stuff that was dreamed up by a bunch of extremists in a think tank who know nothing about politics. And I am hearing from colleagues and friends of mine in red states who are like, what are these people thinking?
Well, you say stupid politics, but as of this moment, he's not running for re-election.
Yeah, but listen, if they go through with this and they cut funding for infrastructure and healthcare and education, and there are layoffs and there's disruptions of service, they're going to get crushed in the midterms. And at the end of the day, these are still politicians, and I think they understand, which is why you see them starting to walk this back yesterday.
So is the ultimate goal to disrupt government, to do away with
Yes.
government?
Yeah, no, look, I think that fundamentally, the Project 2025 authors who Donald Trump has put in charge of the government believe that the federal government as we know it should not exist, should not be helping people with food assistance and health care and housing, and they're trying to use shock and awe tactics to cripple the government. And I can tell you who loves every moment of this is our adversaries, Russia and China, and our adversaries around the country, around the world, who are looking at us and cheering them.
And forgive me if I just follow up on one other point, which is what are people locally telling you, these agencies that may be affected by a freeze?
Yeah, so I think what people need to understand is if they go through with these plans, everyday life for Rhode Islanders is going to get more expensive. For example, if they freeze all of the federal grants and loans that go to the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank and the Narragansett Bay Commission, then that means that Rhode Islanders' utility bills are going to go up even higher because there is less federal funding to help maintain our water systems and our sewer systems, and so that burden is going to fall on ratepayers. If they go through with big cuts to Medicaid, which is something that they have been openly plotting, then that means higher copays, it means more uncompensated care at hospitals, it means that it's going to be even harder to get a doctor in Rhode Island than it is already. So I think that's the part of what people need to understand is that this isn't just like political games, and it's not just government employees who are going to be impacted. Your utility bills are going to go up, your health care bills are going to go up, your cost of putting kids in childcare are going to go up if this federal funding is cut off.
How do you respond to some of President Trump's supporters in Congress who describe this as an effort to get a better handle on federal spending?
Look, we are all for finding ways to make government more efficient, but you do not need to cut off funding to essential services while you figure out how to do that. I find it pretty rich that at the same time that healthcare providers and childcare providers were getting cut off from funding yesterday, House Republicans were partying at the Trump resort in Florida while their own constituents were facing cuts to healthcare and education and food assistance. Talk about being out of touch. And I will say, I am sure that some of these Republican members of Congress, while they do not have the courage to criticize the Trump administration publicly, were privately calling the administration and saying, what are you guys thinking? Knock it off. This is going to kill us in our districts. And you know this because already yesterday they started to back off and say, oh, well, we didn't mean Medicaid, we didn't mean SNAP, we didn't mean this, we didn't mean that. Well, yeah, you did, because in the original memo, the only things that they had excluded were Medicare and Social Security and nothing else. And then yesterday they started to add and.
Could you amplify a little bit on what you said near the top of your comments about the impact in Rhode Island, not the homeland security aspect, but the impact on human service providers, et cetera?
Yeah, and I think a lot of this has been publicly reported already, but obviously the Medicaid reimbursement portal was down yesterday. That means that community health centers weren't able to draw federal funding. It means that hospitals weren't able to draw federal funding. Nursing homes that get a lot of their revenue from Medicaid weren't able to draw federal funding. And a lot of these organizations, community health centers and nursing homes in particular, operate on very thin margins. So if they're not able to make payroll, even for a week or two, they could go out of business. So that happened yesterday. The same appears to be true for Head Start. And again, I read this one publicly as well, so I'm not betraying any confidences, but Children's Friend, which offers Head Start services, weren't able to access their portal yesterday. So those are just a couple of examples. And then, I know that some state agencies had also begun to receive guidance on grants and loans that may be withheld.
What did these actions by the Trump administration in its first couple of weeks tell you about the next 2 years? Is this going to be a pitched battle between the Democrats and Republicans until the midterms?
Yeah, I mean, look, Donald Trump has made it clear that he has no interest in working with Democrats across the aisle to solve the nation's problems. He's empowered extremists who pull stunts like the one that they tried to do yesterday. But as I said earlier, congressional Democrats are going to be rolling out a strategy. We do intend to fight hard for the working people who are counting on us to push back against the administration's extremism. And I think Trump is going to be in for a rude awakening in a couple of ways. Number one, when he was elected to his first term, Republicans had a 20-seat majority in the House. Now they have a 3-seat majority. And when it comes to things like keeping the government funded, addressing the debt ceiling, etc., they are very likely to need Democratic support in order to keep the government functioning. And if they think that we're just going to give them a blank check to continue to pull stunts like they did yesterday, then they're in for a rude awakening. The second thing is, if they keep this stuff up, public opinion is going to shift against them dramatically as well. Pardoning the January 6 rioters, incredibly unpopular. There's already polling out on this. Cutting Medicaid, incredibly unpopular. And for a president who has failed to reach 50% of the popular vote 3 elections in a row, his mandate is not nearly as large as he thinks it is.
Just a clarification.
Yeah.
White House officials, I believe, straight up said on the record that the outage yesterday, at least with the Medicaid portal, was unrelated. Are you saying that?
Yes.
By that?
That's ridiculous. They expect us to believe that on the same day that they put out a memo halting all federal funding, that it's just a coincidence that on that same day the Medicaid portal went down and the SNAP portal went down and the Head Start portal went down all on the same day, and that's all just a big coincidence? Like, do they think the American people are dumb? Like, we know what they're trying to do, and we're going to stop them.
And I was on the press conference with all the attorneys generals yesterday. A big argument they made also is that it's deliberately vague.
Yeah.
Need more clarity.
Yeah. No, because look at again, I go back to the memo that they put out, right? And they said there's going to be a freeze on all federal funding except Social Security and Medicare while they review whether those federal programs include, and I believe the terms were DEI, the Green New Deal, or woke ideology. Like, what does that even mean, right? Like, woke ideology is not a legal term. Neither is the Green New Deal. And so, and also, what law gives them the authority to just cut off vital programs while they search for vague things that they can't even define? So, look, I'll leave the rest of the legal argument to the Attorney General and the other lawyers, but I mean, I think even as a layperson who reads that memo, it looks like something that was written by a middle schooler, not, by a federal agency.
Well, when it comes to legal arguments, just to follow on to that, they seem to have the Supreme Court on their side.
We'll see. I mean, not necessarily. Look, clearly, the Supreme Court is more ideologically aligned with conservatives than with liberals. But, I actually had an opportunity last year to watch a Supreme Court ruling be announced, and it was, it's a great experience. They don't tell you in advance which cases they're going to be reading, right? So you show up and they announce that they're going to have a decision, but you don't know what case it's going to be. And I was actually there when they read the decision on racial gerrymandering that caused Republicans to lose a couple of congressional seats in the South because there were racial gerrymanders in Alabama and Louisiana. So the court does show independence from time to time still, and I think we have to trust that the Constitution and the rule of law still matter, to at least some of us.
So getting a little off topic, but not quite, with all these things happening, I'm not seeing a lot of pushback from Democrats against the dehumanizing language being used in stuff about trans service members, trans people in general. And some of that is related to the idea of wokeism, as you brought up. But I was wondering, what is being done about that kind of stuff? Because that's also destabilizes our military, hurts people. I mean, it's just, medical issues, there's many things related to this.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And this is part of the Trump administration's flood the zone strategy. They do a whole bunch of things at once that they've been cooking up for years so that the public gets too distracted to focus in on any one of the bad things that they try to do. I think Democrats are united in our belief that anyone who can fight and can serve in the military should be able to. And we make ourselves weaker as a nation if we tell people that they are not allowed to serve just because of their identity. If you meet the standards and you can do the job and you're willing to risk your life for your country, you shouldn't be excluded from the opportunity to do that just because Donald Trump is trying to play culture wars and score political points. I imagine that just like many of these other orders, the order to unilaterally exclude trans Americans who meet the standards to serve in the military from being able to serve is something that the administration is doing on very shaky legal ground and will be litigated. But you're absolutely right. It's wrong and makes our country weaker. Yeah.
Congressman Magaziner, I host a radio show in northern Rhode Island where, at least on this morning's show, overwhelmingly the audience was in open celebration of what happened yesterday.
Yeah.
What message would you like to deliver to northern Rhode Island, and part of which is in your constituency?
Yeah, what I would say is, first of all, whoever you voted for, whichever party you support, I am going to fight for you, and Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse are going to fight for you regardless of whether you always agree with us or not. But I can tell you, in northern Rhode Island, if Thunder Mist were to shut down in Woonsocket because they aren't able to draw federal funds, it would be devastating. If nursing homes in Lincoln and Cumberland and all through the Blackstone Valley had to shut down and seniors were put out on the street, it would be devastating. And so I understand that there are people out there who support Donald Trump, who like one aspect of his policies or another, but I am sure that those people who were calling in yesterday do not want to see nursing homes shut down, do not want to see community health centers shut down, and we're going to fight to keep them open.
Is it possible to be an American today who does not have at least a family member directly impacted by yesterday's cuts?
That's a good question. I would think that if these cuts go through, then most Americans will be impacted or have someone in their family who's impacted, either through a cut in services or a layoff, or increased costs like increased utility bills and increased healthcare copays, like I mentioned earlier.
On the J6 parties, what you talk about in your view, Trump's trying to flood the zone, and there's so much stuff that it just flows past and people forget about it. I mean, what kind of feedback are you hearing from law enforcement, from Republicans in Rhode Island? Do you think this just just go largely unchallenged?
Look, people who violently assault police officers should not be pardoned, period. And I think that is something that overwhelmingly Americans, including moderates and conservatives, agree with. And the initial polling that I've seen around this, public polling, is overwhelmingly negative. 80% plus of Americans don't think that people who assaulted police officers on January 6th should be pardoned. Now, taking a step back, I am also concerned that Donald Trump is sending a signal that you can break the law, you can attack police officers, you can commit acts of violence, and as long as you do it under a MAGA banner, you will be given a get-out-of-jail-free card. That is an incredibly dangerous and destabilizing signal to send. And it's also, by the way, a broken promise. I mean, Trump said during the campaign that these cases were going to be considered individually on a case-by-case basis. That was a lie.
Use the phrase destabilizing. Is not that the overarching goal here?
Yes. But those of us who are actually committed to real public safety know that we cannot give up on the notion of equal justice under the law. We cannot give up on the notion that if you assault somebody violently, particularly a member of law enforcement, it doesn't matter why you do it or which political party you ascribe to, there should be a consequence. And we're going to continue to say that vocally, whatever Donald Trump does.
Has there been any sort of calculation, understanding that it's only been 24 hours, on the impact on the overall economy of these type of cuts?
Yeah, I mean, we can get you like specific estimates on this, but I think something in the order of $3 trillion annually across the country is spent on federal grants. And the way the original memo read, that entire $3 trillion was going to be cut off, which of course would have enormous economic implications and ultimately would lead to higher costs for everyday people, from utility rates going up, healthcare bills going up, childcare bills going up, etc.
But in terms of actual throughput to the local economies, withdrawing that type of funds overnight, what are your thoughts?
It would be devastating, and it would fall. The impact would fall hardest on middle-income and low-income Rhode Islanders who can't afford higher costs. And I think that the impact would be devastating, and working people will get hurt. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you guys. I'm sure we will be talking a lot the next few days. So.
Do you have an understanding of what Judge McConnell has in store for this afternoon? He's scheduled a hearing on, I don't know if it's a hearing.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Yeah.